I love the new update because it's very abrasively lets you know that there is a recording.
No, you are being recorded.
All right. Well, welcome, task force members, councilwoman. All right, we will get started here shortly, as always. Give folks about 5 minutes to log in and log on. Bless you, Jamal.
Oh, thank you. I thought I was on mute.
Mr. Carter, how are you?
Missing the beach? I'm fine.
You can't beat that. You can't beat that. It's almost like we saw you all yesterday.
Yeah, it's about right.
What are our weeks going to consist of when we're not together? Michael, I'm just going to have to come sit in on your fantasy football games. You know, I'll watch the stats from afar. We're going to give folks a few minutes to join here. We'll get started here just shortly. Ajmel, how are you? Sadie, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Wonderful. Wonderful. We're going to give folks just a few more minutes here to join. I know we all deeply enjoy seeing Jamal's pearly whites, so I'm going to give folks a few more minutes to get here and be with us.
You say my pearly whites
Pearly whites.
on my teeth.
You do have a nice smile, Jamal.
Thank you. Should be a recommendation.
All righty. Dwayne, I hope things are well in your world.
Hey there, Javin. Yep, everything is really good. How about you?
Can't complain. Like I often say, nobody will listen.
That's it. I understand.
Nobody will listen. That's right. Hey, Adam.
How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Looking at this handy numbered list that Jamal just sent around.
42 items on that handy list.
Handy dandy. Right. Well, we're still on the lighter side, so we're just going to give folks a hair longer to join so that we don't.
Adam, I thought you like handy.
All right. Well, it is 5:36 p.m. and we'll have folks join as they do. But it is 5:36 p.m. on Tuesday, June 29th. Welcome to the June 29th installment of the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force. Excited to be here with you all, and thank you for the two for this week. Back-to-back meetings are never easy, so we're going to get through this, and as always, appreciate your time, your dedication, your perseverance, and your commitment to this process. So to give you a quick overview of where we are and where we are going, we are going to do a brief download of what happened yesterday, download on the community listening session, see if we have any reactions to it. And then from there, we're going to jump right into the task force recommendations. Michael will lead us through that discussion. And as you know, we have this meeting today to get this all together. Our goal is to work to get things as finalized as possible so that we can work to have everything ready to go by the end of the week. Then we'll come back together next Tuesday to put the bow on the present for us to be ready to deliver to council. All right. You all know the charge. Thank you, Councilwoman, for joining us today. Councilwoman Searcy is here in attendance with us. We are grateful for you. You all know the charge. We've done this before. We're here to do the right thing by good people. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jamal to lead us through a quick recap of last night.
Thank you, Jevin. And again, as Jevin mentioned, we're spending a lot of tonight digging in on the recommendations and finalize that. As mentioned last night, all of the videos and links and summaries from every session and every meeting we've done together lives online. So please use that as a reference, or if folks want to visit last night's meeting to recap, please visit the Takoma Park Public Safety website to do so. Before I hand it over to my colleague, Michael, kind of to walk us through the recommendation, I want to kind of get a gauge on how folks are feeling from last night. Really want to leave some space for folks who have any thoughts or feedback before we start digging into the recommendations. Are there any thoughts or feedback folks have from last night, structure, how it went, or what we heard, and the deeply engaged residents who attended last night? Awesome. So if not, we can spend much more time digging in on the recommendations, and what I sent around to you all was the draft recommendations we put out on Friday from that draft, and those are all numbered. Nothing changed, but really to help use as a reference point as here the number associated with that recommendation. So I'll turn it over to my colleague. Oh, I see two hands raised. I'll start with Jumana.
Just a quick thought on last night. I don't know if it was like strictly up to us to advertise, but I feel like in the past I've seen it all out there or advertised a lot more for the public sessions, and I didn't see that this time, and I don't feel like we got a lot of reminders. And so yes, we had a few people on who were very vocal, but a lot less people than I would have expected. And so I think it was just kind of a missed opportunity.
Thank you for that feedback. Michael Rubin.
Yeah, I mean, it's, similar along those lines, but I guess a follow-up for Michael. I think I asked a number of meetings back if we could quantify how many people in total were talked to among the different like focus groups and community meetings and how many responded to the online form. So I'm just trying to figure out like what percentage of the 17,000 residents of Takoma Park actually participated in this process, because I think that would help inform us a little bit. That's all.
Got it, Michael. We will pull, that lives in a lot of different places. We've been assembling it, but it's partly viewership of the meetings, it's focus groups, it's all of that, the business walk. So we'll pull all that together with numbers behind it and share it around so it can go in that final report once everyone sees it.
Thank you, Michael. Any additional feedback?
No, I mean, the only thing that may come up out of this is when we recommend for like additional work that needs to happen, it may be like reaching larger numbers of people and certainly larger numbers of residents of color, because I think that they were underrepresented in the community forums. And I don't know about other, focus groups or other things, but I do think that that's going to be really important to make sure we get buy-in for any of these changes going forward.
Thank you for that feedback.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do, anything else, Jamal? I'm sorry, sir.
No, I was just going to ask any additional feedback. If not, I was going to turn it over to you to walk us through the recommendations.
So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna share my screen. I wanna make sure everyone can see it. Are you seeing a Word document on your screen? Perfect. Let me put you all up here so I can see you all. What we have done in the document that I'm sharing right here, we have changed nothing. I want to make sure it's very clear. There's been some questions and comments about, are we at Link changing anything? Is the city editing anything? Every word in here should be the word that came from the subcommittees. So as we go through this, if you don't like word choice, if there's anything like that, let us know. So what I did was I put in yellow anything that we added, and it's simply some topic headings for us to talk through today. So what I'm going to do is kind of scroll through this document with a good amount of certainty. We used some of our judgment to take everything that lived in the 42 individual items and tried to figure out if they fit together in topics. Many of you were extremely helpful in this. Some of you sent back track edited versions or emails that said these ones seem like they fit together. So what we're going to do is go through these today, see if they fit under any specific topic areas or not. Are any of the recommendations at this point duplicative? And can they be merged together? Or is there a really specific reason why we're calling them out separately? And again, I want to clarify that, our opinion isn't important here. It doesn't matter what Link thinks about these. This is your recommendation as a task force. So if this very specific answer is, yes, we're recommending 3 different new departments and functions, and it's up to the city to figure that out, we're not asking you to make 3 recommendations too. We just want to make sure there was some thought behind, are we actually asking for different things, or did this happen at the subcommittee level? And now that we're at a task force, we're actually saying similar things. So we're simply seeking alignment so we can see which one of these have to be adjusted, if any. So when we went through the list, the 17-page document, it seemed largely that the recommendations fit into these types of topics: community-led engagement and oversight, new departments and functions, data, dispatch, which is not properly named, but there were a number of things that talked about a 24-hour dispatch function, a 311, a 911, et cetera. So we grouped those together just to see if there was some alignment around them. Personnel, communication, policing and enforcement, resources and funding, and then advocacy or multi-governmental partnerships. So the things that might not be within Takoma Park's jurisdictional control, but are still things that task force wants to have a position on because they want the city to help advocate for, et cetera. So as we're going through these, if these are not the right topics, we can rename them. We don't have to put them under these topics, but I lumped them this way just to give us some way to dig in. So as I scroll down here, and again, just before we started today, Jamal sent around the discussion draft that was posted on Friday with the bullets replaced with numbers, just to make sure that we had an easier way to track these today. So community-led engagement and oversight. There were about 4 different recommendations made for civilian staffed oversight going forward. There was recommendation number 4, which talked about a Takoma Park Public Safety Task Force. Recommendation 16 talked about what that task force would look at. So it got into a pretty specific level of detail. Recommendation 32 said that we need some kind of community standing committee. From the discussions, it sounded like the recommendation was a standing committee of the council, but the word in here was standing committee. And then if we keep scrolling down, there was also in recommendations 36 and 37, a recommendation for a citizen oversight board and some real discussion on whether that should be an auditor level position or a citizens review board. So with these four, as the groups recommended these, is it important, especially with the top ones, that we have a standing public safety task force as well as a standing committee of the council? Or can those be combined into a recommendation that there is a body that remains convened in a formal way for public safety things going forward? Go ahead, Ajamel.
So same caveats as always. I'm only speaking for myself. I drafted the first one about the public safety task force. Personally, I don't care whether it's a public safety task force or a standing committee. I just picked public safety task force because that was the construct within which we were working.
Got it. And that one certainly has the most detail assigned to it. So for the group that came up with number 32 about a standing committee, do you think we can combine that recommendation into the standing public safety task force to say, we want a body, we want it to look at this, or is there a need for a second committee that would be more of a standing committee to the council? And facilitators, if this was your group, I'd love some input here.
And to be clear, I mean, I've tried to be very clear that I'm not wedded to it being the task force. And so for those of y'all who are more educated than I am, which is most of y'all, if a standing committee of the council is better, that's good with me. I just don't know practically what the difference is in real life.
I mean, I think the sub bullets that we had under 32 are important. I don't think it makes a difference what we call it or anything like that. I mean, I think, the idea of stipends for community members, I think to ensure, that everyone can participate, because many people have to take off work to attend a meeting such as this and are not going to get paid for that and can't afford to do that. So, and then I think that, we thought the idea of being proportional by, something other than just like equal number by ward would not be the way to go. And I think something somewhat along the lines of how we were structured is a better way to go. And I think, with more from 5 and 6 makes some sense to me. So, and citizen oversight maybe is a slightly different issue. I mean, that may be something that comes up as a recommendation, and that's fine. But I feel like the first two are important to include in whatever we say for this bullet. So.
Perfect. And that's why I kept 36 and 37 kind of separate, because that seems like it's going for a very different level of specificity around police oversight. But what I'm hearing is for these first ones, this idea of a standing body, whether it's called the Takoma Park Public Safety Task Force or something else, that's the recommendation, that there be a standing body, that it do the things here in these bullets. And then we add the bullets from number 32 to it to say we would like some stipends in there. We'd like to make sure the membership is proportional and that citizens and oversight be prioritized. Does that sound right to everybody?
I mean, I do think using the same title of what we currently are, recognizing that the work is not done, might make some sense rather than trying to rebrand with a different name, because I think we all recognize that we had a compressed time frame and this is only step one. So,
yep, I agree with that. If anyone else has thoughts, this is a pretty easy one. We'll get into more, but if anyone else has thoughts, and I know we're processing this in real time, so this is not the only opportunity. What we're going to do after this is take everything from this meeting, consolidate it into that updated draft that we send back around. But I'm gonna make some notes as we go to make sure I'm capturing these correctly. So going to 36 and 37, as Michael just pointed out, these sound very specific, and I want to make sure we don't lose that. Kiminori, go ahead.
Yeah, where is that the second standing committee idea? Is it also the subcommittee one?
It was number 32 in that document that just came out. Facilitators, what group did that come from?
I'm just looking at the original, discussion draft. So
That's alternatives.
Oh, alternative. Okay.
Did anyone from alternatives wanted to touch on that?
Sadie or Michael?
Sadie can too if she wants.
Oh no, it's okay. I pretty much what Michael was saying is what I agree with.
Okay.
Cool.
And there's absolutely no reason I can't share the document I'm working from here. So if helpful, we can just email this around too, so you can see specifically what I'm working from. Jamal, why don't we do that? I was simply doing it organized by topic so that we'd have something to go through, but we can send that around as well. Jamal, just throw a draft on it so that it's out there. So moving down, 36 and 37 seem like they were developed with a very specific intent. And again, not looking to change them, but I just wanted to make sure the things being talked about here, would that fit within an expanded public safety task force mandate, or these are something completely different because you're dealing with citizen oversight of the police department? Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so I think some of it might fit within it. I mean, as we are studying the new laws that are taking effect next year, we're realizing that the auditor model is probably more feasible, and it's just going to be very difficult to have like a civilian review board that does parallel investigations, just because the state law pretty clearly requires the police department to do the investigation. So I haven't discussed this with my fellow subcommittee members, but it's possible there could be just like a chunk of the work that the standing task force does. Maybe it has subcommittees like we have now, and I think it would be helpful to have some members who are dedicated to the kind of things that the auditor is described as doing, like evaluating the more macro level stuff, the police department policies, but also just an avenue for citizens to send in more generalized complaints. There can be concerns that citizens have that don't really rise to the level of a legal or policy violation, right? It could just be that this cop sits at the corner of whatever streets and pulls everyone over when they go 2 inches over the stop line. And I think that's a harassment and waste of resources, but it's not necessarily, violating policy. That there should be a place for concerns like that to go. So that's
Adam,
my spiel.
We got a question. I think it was just texted to me in the chat. Could you expand just briefly on what the auditor function is, just for folks who don't have that level of background? Is that a staff position? It's not a volunteer position, is the question.
Kiminori,
Gonna kick it over to Kiminori.
who is Kiminori? I know you did lots of research on that on behalf of the committee. Do you want to jump in about?
Yeah, I was thinking of more staff position. I think it has a little more formal roles to play, I think, in terms of trying to differentiate from other standing committees or continuation of task force, because I mean, I was sort of thinking of it as sort of like it can review existing policies, practices, training, or complaints, or the patterns of investigation, if there's anything. I mean, this county level thing that's going to happen next year, they're going to, of course, look into each individual complaint, although the police department will continue to do the investigation. But, another body to look at sort of more, sort of broader patterns of problems, let's say, within the city related to public safety. And I didn't want to also limit to like just police either. But that can be sort of debated.
Thank you, Kiminori. Michael?
Just a question maybe for this subcommittee. I mean, you guys discuss the possibility that maybe there are a lot of potential complaints against the Takoma Park Police, that people are just intimidated from filing with the police, and that if there was somewhere else to take it, that they might actually do so? Because I know it didn't come up in our conversations.
I mean, yeah, I can say that was kind of the motivation behind the Citizens Review Board. But when I really dug into the details, this police accountability board that's going to be created at the county level is supposed to serve that function. So it's supposed to be exactly that, a place where people can deliver complaints without going directly to the police department. And if they do go to the police department, they route it to the PAB anyway. And I think from my perspective is that it really is just more of a communications challenge for us. We want to make sure that Takoma Park residents know about it. I mean, I'm a Maryland lawyer who lives and breathes this kind of stuff, and I didn't know about it until I, read the 80-page bill. So we've got to find a way, to make sure citizens know that this is being created, and that's where they can go to deliver their complaints. But I think it would also be great if they have more, like I said, macro level stuff, like the way that the police department is prioritizing things, that something like the task force we're envisioning could receive those less specific complaints.
So what I'm
If I could
hearing
just-
here, go ahead.
If I could just add something to what, excuse me, to what Adam was saying, and just to say thanks again to Adam, for he really did go through that bill and sort of broke it down for all of us. But I think that is sort of an indication of part of the issue, is that it is incredibly difficult to figure out sort of what are the mechanisms and how they work. And so we had gone back and forth on a lot of this, a citizens review board, an auditor, something else, what works with the new law. But I think the ultimate question that we sort of need to be getting to the bottom of is, what is an accessible, understandable, and even comfortable, to what Michael was talking about, right, system for people to be able to bring complaints forward if they want to. And so, I think to the extent that people also have thoughts on that, we're totally open. But I just wanted to make the point that, I mean, I'm not joking when I said for all of us, I think had Adam not just gone full law school on us and like gone through the bill and created an outline and broke it all down, I don't know that we would have even this sense of understanding that we do.
So what I'm hearing here is there is a very specific reason there's this level of specificity. We should leave in as much specificity as possible and then answer questions as the council has them. Does it make sense? So the auditor stuff seems to be clear. For the citizen review board, does it make sense to add a sub-bullet that says worth consideration on if this could be part of the public safety task force or a separate body, so that folks know like this could fit there or it could be separate? We'll figure that out as we see what the state does. Is that a fair way to tie these together?
So I think we're leaning toward the auditor model. If I don't know if that sounds right to the rest of my subcommittee. So I think that in the final draft, the citizen review board bullet, which is supposed to be an alternative to the auditor model, will just be cut. So and I think, but I do agree with it that there's a possibility that we could present this as kind of a menu of options for the city council, which is like Kevin Ori was saying, you could create an auditor position that's maybe reports directly to the city manager, but not the police department. It could be, as Christy Lopez said, someone who has this as part of their job, but not their whole job if there's not enough there and in the third alternative, it could be a subset of the members of the standing committee or continuing task force.
Got it.
I'm even thinking, I don't want to make up a recommendation here. If we're, to your point, Adam, if parts of the CRB either be stripped or some parts go to the auditor model, or some parts can also go to the, if you scroll all the way up, the establish a permanent public safety task force. So I wonder if some of those things laid out can go in those three buckets.
Yep. So what I'm hearing here is the recommendation may be auditor, and then we might give an if not an auditor, a citizens review board that needs to be able to do these types of things. And if that can be part of the task force model, great. If it needs to be separate, great. The point is that we need something that is open, trusted, easy to use, and people know how to access it. Am I getting the kind of why right on that?
I would just add, I mean, I think the other thing that we wanted to be clear on was not just that it was accessible and people felt like they could use it, but
Yep.
that it was transparent and that people were able to sort of understand what happened beginning to end. And
Yep.
that if it was some form of citizen review board, that they actually had the authority to look at what they needed to look at and make recommendations and not just be sort of a, well, they looked at it and then we did this and we didn't talk to them and that's how it is. I think originally they'd written, and I'm sorry, you can't see if it's in here right now, but we had written in that, that the board had the authority to make recommendations. The council or chief decided not to follow the recommendations, that also had to come with a public explanation, right? So, I mean, I think when you're talking about parameters, that it should be open, transparent, the process should be knowable, and that if there were, they should have the authority to look into what they need to, and if there was a divergence on the decision, that there was also a public explanation attached to it. So like the most transparency and accountability as possible within that process.
Perfect. I see Kiminori, Adam, and Dwayne. Kiminori?
Yeah, I think we can, like, I mean, again, like we haven't really discussed within a subcommittee, but keep the sort of auditor model as sort of like a lead model, and then this the CRB. I think some of the specifics, details can be cut, and when the new system comes in next year, and there's, let's say there's like a general public dissatisfaction with it, maybe cities can move on to establish and consider another model with investigative powers, right? For example, like auditor, I don't think it has that, because again, it's just gonna, as things come in, investigative body will sort of clash with the new system. So I don't want that for the auditor model at this point, personally. But city can consider other options down the road if there's a problem with a new model.
Perfect. Dwayne?
Yeah, thanks. This is a partial question for the committee, probably Jumana, Kaminori, and Adam, and others who may be on the committee, because I don't know. But my question with respect to the auditor model that is presented here, as opposed to the Citizens Review Board, because my understanding is that the Citizens Review Board may have some conflicts with the law that has been proposed and that will go into effect next year. But with the auditor model, can it or will it be able to have access to whatever complaints come up that are related to Takoma Park residents or raised by Takoma Park residents? Say, for example, if a Takoma Park resident makes a complaint to the state board and about officer conduct for some issue, maybe harassing or use of force or something to that effect, or something like that, and will the auditor review board have access to the outcome of that particular complaint and the information that was reviewed under that complaint, and going forward make recommendations whether they agree or don't agree with the outcome of that complaint?
I think if the city council goes with our first recommendation, then everyone will have access to that stuff, and the auditor can just kind of take the lead on gathering community feedback on how the complaints are shaking out and making recommendations to address any sort of systemic issues that they might see arising. But I think in terms of having immediate access, like as soon as the complaint is filed, that's probably going to clash with the new laws. And I don't know that we'd be able to recommend that. But once the complaints are adjudicated, I think we want them to be available to everyone. And if not, I certainly think we all would certainly support the auditor having access to those materials.
Does it answer your question, Mr. Scott?
I didn't mean to speak for the whole subcommittee, though. If others have different thoughts, please.
Okay, so what I wrote here is leaning towards the auditor model as the lead recommendation. Get updated language from the subcommittee, and Jamal, you'll coordinate with your committee on that to make sure that as updated language is developed, it is inserted here in the right place. That sound correct, everyone? I'm going to keep us moving just because it's a large document, but please stop me, push me back. We can come back to anything. I know we're doing this in real time here. So the next section here, and these are in no order. I was just trying to make some sense of the format here. I put this under new department / functions, and these seem to be recommendations that involved creating a new division or reallocating folks largely into a non-police function, etc. So we've got a neighborhood services division. That was recommendation number 5. We have the creation of a community assistance office. That was recommendation number 23. And then recommendation 8 was the funding of a community safety team. And then recommendation 41 was moving non-police functions that are not tied to a violation of the criminal code outside of the police department. It didn't seem to be a recommendation on exactly where to move them, but they needed to be separated from the police department. My sense is some of these are overlapping in the goal, and we might just be using different names, but I'd like to get some feedback from the task force as a whole on which ones of these are redundant and can be streamlined and which ones are doing completely different things. So as proposed, Neighborhood Services Division, Community Assistance Office, and Community Safety Team, are those envisioned to do different things, or is it really a naming protocol at this point? Go ahead, Ajmal.
All right. So I think that, in my opinion, the community, could you scroll up a tiny bit? There you go, that's good. All right, so, and then if you scroll back down just a tiny bit again. So the community safety team was my committee's, or our committee's, community of life creation. I think that the community safety team overlaps, in my opinion, with the community assistance team. Both of those are aimed at addressing situations which previously have been dealt with by the police, but are really more appropriate for individuals who have mental health service training as well as social service training. In my opinion, as one of the drafters of the community safety bullet point, I think that could be combined with the community assistance office point. Now, I think that that is different than the neighborhood safety, the neighborhood services division. The neighborhood services division was not individuals who are responding to mental health situations, but were going to be responsible for enforcement of things that have traditionally been criminalized and, in my opinion, should not be criminalized. So it was an attempt to get at broken windows policing. That doesn't mean that the neighborhood services division and the community services / assistance division couldn't be combined. They could if we thought that that would be more likely that it would be adopted, but those are two distinct things in terms of their services and the training of the individuals who would be involved. In my opinion, with regards to number 41, the last category, I think that 41 can be split amongst the neighborhood services and the community safety assistance team, whatever. But I'm not the drafter of 41, although I like 41. But I think that I think it can fit into either community service or neighborhood services division. Those are my thoughts, but again, not really wedded to them.
No, I appreciate that. And as I was reading these, I was having similar organizational thoughts. Jumana.
Yeah, so we were responsible for 41, and in terms of where they belong, I think it depends, I guess, what gets created. I do think that like code enforcement could definitely go into neighborhood services. I think I'm sorry, because I'm looking at this screen instead of the document, but what was the other one? The name of the other one?
Community safety
Community
or community
safety.
assistance, sorry.
Or community assistance. So like a victim's advocate could be there. I think crossing guards could be in either. It depends how you think about community safety, I guess, right? A red light camera coordinator, I don't know if that's neighborhood services. I don't know if that's somewhere else. The purpose in looking at this wasn't necessarily to create other places, but just to look at things that did not need law enforcement oversight. And it doesn't mean that if, something is happening where a crossing guard is, that like the police cannot be called. So I feel like there was that pushback from people. But, for the most part, they do what they do. They stand out there, they help kids get to school. That just doesn't need to be overseen by the police department. And so that was the major goal of that, was to look at the things that didn't have any kind of, criminal code enforcement function and move them out of the police department. So, I mean, where I think we were open to.
Got it. So, perfect. So what I'm hearing here is the goal is to take anything that doesn't need to be within the police department or the police chain of command or the police response out of the police department.
Now, to be very clear, the goal is to move anything that is not tied to the enforcement of the criminal code outside of the police department, right? So I think that level of specificity is important to me, because if there's not, and if there's no touch to actually enforcing a violation of criminal law, that it doesn't need law enforcement function.
And
enforcement function, maybe. Law enforcement, no.
And I would go even a step further, and I think, although Jemana, you should definitely correct me if I'm wrong, I would go even a step further and say that there are some, to the extent that, police officers under the Constitution will have the authority to enforce all criminal code violations, but that doesn't mean that we as a municipality can't make a decision that the responsibility for enforcing certain criminal code violations as well should be tasked to individuals who are not police officers.
Got it. Jemana, I saw your hand and then it disappeared. Were you jumping back in?
Yeah, I don't know if I totally need to jump in. I think, we also had a specific recommendation on deprioritizing misdemeanors, minor offenses, minor drug offenses. But, to the extent that things could legally be tasked out that, again, are not touching any kind of like serious offense. I don't know. We hadn't discussed that, but I don't know that I'm opposed to that. I think the key was to try and focus law enforcement powers on the enforcement of more serious activity that is, could harm people, could, put people's lives at risk. Like we're not asking crossing guards to go intervene, right, if there is a gunfight, but what we're saying is we just don't think that law enforcement officers with arms and the ability to use lethal force need to necessarily be stopping someone for a broken taillight. So if it's the extent where some of these like minor traffic things, like you're not wearing a seatbelt, your taillight is out, your plates are expired, things that really have no great impact on anybody generally, like that be taken out of any kind of policing function. I think we had to deprioritize, but I think that I would be open. I'm not speaking for my whole committee, but absolutely be open to thinking about how that could look.
No, that particular recommendation about prioritizing the criminal stuff versus the not so serious crimes. That's down in the enforcement, so we'll get to that too.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, just a very small point. Just when we describe whichever office we describe, I think it's important to also mention substance abuse referral, domestic violence extractions. There are sometimes where a police officer may need to respond to a domestic violence situation, but most of the times it's someone after the fact, something happened and they need to be removed from the home. And that doesn't need to be a police officer. That needs to be someone who's more clued in and trained for dealing with that situation. So I think we just need to mention a few more specific areas that would be covered by whatever that neighborhood services team or whatever we call it,
Got it. And Michael, I want to make sure I get it. So you were talking about domestic violence specifically and substance abuse as the types of examples?
Right. So domestic violence extraction, like removing someone who's been, abused to somewhere else, doesn't need to be a police involvement in that situation. If someone's actively doing something and hurting somebody, then yes, you probably need an officer response at that moment. But typically that's not the usual case. That's probably a small minority of the cases. And same thing with substance abuse. Oftentimes, the only way somebody can get somebody into treatment is to get them arrested. Well, there may be other ways to make that referral and to have something happen other than through escalation to police. So that's all.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it. Kiminori, then Adam, then Jumana.
Yeah, I think someone in the listening session yesterday hinted that sometimes the court enforcement goes better with this police officer or company or something like that. I just don't know what they do right now, so I don't know any scenarios like that. But in case this police assistance is needed, should we keep that sort of possibility open within this new neighborhood services division or some other name for it?
I do want to make a point real quick. I know one of the things that the chief clarified was that the folks who are in these non-law enforcement roles are non-sworn officers, so they are armed. So in the case, I think that if something does happen, they still have to make a call to dispatch.
Right, but that's right now, right?
Right.
If that division is moved outside of the police department, can they still, seek assistance and then they kind of work together rather than so like, you don't do this anymore, we do it, we have nothing to do with you.
Right. Got it. That makes sense. And I don't want to recommend a recommendation here, but in some other reports that have come out, some people are like, well, some of these things need police, so they always have to be there. And it's like, well, if they need police, the police would respond. Most of these don't need to start with the police interaction, and that's why they should be separated out with a different command and control structure. And so that's what I'm hearing here is let's not start something with a police response that actually needs a community safety team response or neighborhood services response. But of course, if something escalated to a point that was required, there's policing functions that are available to anyone in Takoma Park in those types of moments. Kiminori, am I getting that somewhat right?
Yes, okay. I thought that could be, explicitly included.
Perfect. I'll add a note. Adam?
Yeah, just first to follow up on Kiminori's point, I think that's right. And I think, Michael, you said it well, just that, the neighborhood services people can call the police like anybody calls the police. And if we just, drop a line in there that says that, to the extent the situation calls for it, they can call on the police. I wanted to just touch briefly on the, deprioritizing of minor offenses. My recommendation would be that we have something in there about how we suggest that whatever body we create, the continuing task force, play a role in just figuring out exactly how that's all going to break down, because I think the devil is really in the details there. I mean, just the traffic code is like thousands of pages, and so, if we just say deprioritize minor stuff, it's not a really like easy to implement recommendation, and there may be very thoughtful reasons why some seemingly minor things should still be enforced and others not. One example would be if somebody's tag is expired by a few months, I think it's silly to pull them over and ding them for that. But if there's a tag that's super old and doesn't even come up in the system, then maybe that's somebody that's putting a tag on a vehicle because they want to go commit a robbery, and then the vehicle can't be traced back anywhere. So we don't need to resolve that now. Just an example of the kind of thing that could be kicked around going forward.
It's helpful. Jumana?
So I just wanted to say a couple of things about that. Like for me, I would not be amenable to dropping in a line saying, and if they need to call the police. And the reason I say that, for like a neighborhood services claim, and the reason I say that is this. The mistake I think that people make is trying to create recommendations or legislate to the rare occurrence versus like what happens all the time. And so is there a scenario where someone's getting called on noise ordinance and they're unruly and maybe get like, sure, that could be a scenario. And I'm sure there has been a scenario. But the point is, there is nothing, it has never been anything violent and threatening their neighbors that you can't call the police. Like there's two separate things happening there. There's a noise complaint, and then there's somebody who may be threatening people. That makes it very easy to call the police. So I don't think, or I would not support writing that in personally, because writing that in then sort of invites more police attendance at these things, right? So I would not be amenable to that. The second thing I wanted to address, and I put in the chat that I very much support what Michael was saying about sort of specifics around when we're dealing with whether it's addiction, domestic violence, other things. One of the reasons for me in the moving the victims advocate role out of the police department, and historically I've been for a sexual assault program, and I worked on domestic violence issues, and the two don't always go hand in hand. Like sexual assault can happen, domestic violence can happen. The people who are at the receiving end don't always want to prosecute and don't always want to interact with police. I'm looking at Dwayne's comment, homeless individuals to the list as well. But the point is, there can be things that are in fact violations of the criminal code, but the person who's at the receiving end of that violation does not want prosecution to happen for whatever reason. And there can be a million reasons. And so that's why, a victim's advocate, it doesn't even like outside of the question of is this enforcement, it doesn't necessarily naturally fit in a police department, right? Because if you're the victim's advocate, and I know it's not quite how I think it's phrased, the so-called victim is not always on board with a prosecution or what the kind of action the police want to take. And so, when my role as a victim's advocate was always to, ensure that the person got the resources they needed, support if they had to go to court. We were even trained for sexual assault victims. Like there are times you meet them at the police station, right? While they sort of tell the police what happened, you go with them to the hospital if they're getting a sexual assault exam, you talk them through what the exam looks like. And one of the things we were trained on specifically is that there are times when the police will try to get things out of you. Like, I don't know, the person seemed unsure about this. What do you think? Like we were trained very specifically that you just don't engage. That is not your job. Your job is to make sure that the person gets what they need, that they know what resources are available, that they know what to expect and what's coming. So those are my thoughts on some of those.
Thank you, Jumana. Adam?
I just failed to lower my hand, sorry.
Perfect. So we are at the point as a task force that it would be really helpful to have some alignment about what we think as a task force needs to be explicitly said versus we're not in alignment. So we're not going to put it forward as a recommendation, but we can either note when we're talking to council or in the document that there was a robust discussion about this. We didn't come to a resolution, but here are the pros and cons, or we can just decide to leave it out. So Kiminori made a specific recommendation around maybe adding a note around coordination. Jumana made a specific recommendation about why that might not be appropriate. Would love to get a sense of where folks are, or if this needs to be discussed over the next week, and we'll come to some resolution. So Kiminori and then Dwayne.
Yeah, I don't, I don't need that to be explicitly stated if there's a disagreement. And I mean, looking at, all the sort of, I'm looking at also the community assistance office and the community safety team, and there are like million other models out there, and, and Kahoots and all the other similar ones. I mean, they all coordinate, right? I mean, without coordination, nothing works. Sometimes there's, 911 call comes in, then looks like it's like a safe call, but once those non-police teams get there and there's some, issue, right, that may require police assistance, and that happens. So, I mean,
yeah,
it's just in reality that happens. So I don't need that to be explicitly stated.
Got it. Dwayne?
Yeah, so I raised my hand not necessarily to try to resolve what was Kiminori versus Jumana's point, but let me say what I initially thought of, raise my hand for, and then maybe I could weigh in on that point. What I was asking for is inclusion in the community safety model, something that we had discussed within our group, which is including the ability, I'm not sure if it's in here or not, but I didn't see it, the ability to have someone or on staff who can mediate neighborhood disputes between parties. I think that person would fit well within either model. I think there, like you said, that there's a big overlap, and I'd like to see the inclusion of a recommendation that has a mediator be involved, who can be called upon to resolve any ongoing issues between parties that do not need police presence. or a police response. So that's one thing. Then just with respect to what Jumana and Kaminori were going back and forth about in the discussion as to whether we need to say a police officer, we reserve the right to have a police officer involved. I don't think that's necessary. I think parties will, this is just my personal opinion, this is me, I think parties will, I think our community and our society is very well trained to call the police and ask for the police when they need to and when they feel it is necessary. And we're trying to create a model that diverts people from having to call the police or have the police be involved in situations that are not necessary. So I don't necessarily think that we need to say, all right, and they reserve the right to have the police involved, or we reserve the right to include the police. That is, I think, already well ingrained in our society, well ingrained in the procedures that people go through when they feel in danger or they feel there's an issue that requires police to be involved. Like I said, our goal here is to create a model that takes that diverts people from having to rely on police for non-criminal offenses or non-criminal involved issues. So, so for all it's worth, I agree with what Jumana said.
Perfect. It sounds like the sense is, go ahead, Kaminori.
Yeah, that's fine with that. In terms of, are we still trying to resolve the community assistance office and community safety team too, right?
Yep.
Okay. So one thing to consider is, people end up calling, police or 911 because they're the only sort of 24/7 services that actually people come when there's crisis happens in the middle of the night, right? Or there could be other services, but they're accustomed to do so. So whatever that other office or other service provider division that we're going to create, we have to take that into account, right? Crisis cannot be contained within 9 to 5.
Right.
So either that if the city cannot provide that service after some hours, it has to coordinate with the county or other service providers to do a sort of warm handoff, right? Not just like, here's the number you can call, because then people go back to 911. So just something to think about.
No, absolutely. I've bolded that in here. We have dispatch as a separate section in here where I think that has to also be included.
Right. It has to work together, those two things.
Absolutely. Emil?
Thank you. So I guess if we're still trying to potentially consolidate some of these recommendations under new departments' functions, someone may have already said this, and if so, my apologies. It seems to me that 5 and 41 there's a lot of overlap, basically the same recommendation, moving non-policing functions that don't require a sworn officer into a separate division outside of the police department. And I think our subcommittee came up with, I think it was largely Ajmal, but our subcommittee came up with number 5. And I think one of the other subcommittees came up with I think Adam, Jumana, et cetera, came up with number 41, which again is very similar. I think we're not, and I think Ajmal might have said this, we're not wedded to a title, whether it's called Neighborhood Services Division or not. The point is, as Jumana put it, that if you're talking about a function such as crossing guards doesn't require a sworn officer, then it doesn't need to be in the police department. So it seems as though those two could be consolidated pretty easily. And 23 and 8 also, again, there's a lot of overlap there and they could be consolidated. I don't think we are set on the phrasing community safety team. I think other people prefer, if the consensus community assistance is better, that's fine. I think under the community assistance office, under the description, one of the tasks is dealing with mental health emergencies. So one way to do that is with, again, a team of people or with multiple, again, mental health professionals. So I think those two could be consolidated. I think the two subcommittees could work together potentially to come up with consolidated language for those two sets of recommendations. That seems doable, so we don't have 4 recommendations, again, 2 sets of 2 that have a lot of overlap. It seems as though this is doable, but if others feel that it would be difficult to consolidate, then I would defer to them. But I think, again, the subcommittees could work together to consolidate these 4 into 2.
That's my sense of what I'm hearing as well. Anyone have objection to that? Otherwise, we'll work to just realign them into 2 and send that back around to make sure things are in the right areas. And then the subcommittees can move anything that needs to be where. Okay. Perfect. I'm going to move us down here. Welcome, Councilmember Siemens. I'm going down to data. Imperfect title, but there were about 3 recommendations that asked for new data to be collected or asked for different ways for things to be collected. I don't think there's overlap here. They're all different data sets. I just wanted to make sure this was comprehensive and that there's nothing else that we're asking for that isn't on this list, or if any of these you think are redundant. So one of them was around disaggregated data on public schools to really determine if the community engagement suggestions in the education section are working. Dispatch data to be disaggregated by officer initiation versus community initiation, as well as by ward. And then this one said quantifying instances where officers attempted to use and successfully where they successfully use de-escalation techniques. I put that as a data request. We need to track this and get reporting on it. But if I'm getting that wrong, let us know. All of those, everyone in agreement with? Any data sets that we don't have that we need to add to this list, or any of these redundant?
Michael?
Yes.
Sorry, the last bullet that you referenced was put elsewhere specifically because it was we were attempting to tie it to a carrot approach, where we were issuing bonuses or what have you based on attempting to de-escalate, and we wanted to tie the reporting to it.
Got it. If someone has the doc in front of them and can give me what that recommendation is that it's tied to, I'll note it to make sure it's moved there. But thank you. We'll make that adjustment.
I do think it's a data thing as well, just because we do get data on use of force, but we don't get data on de-escalation. I think that should be something that the community would be interested in. So,
yep. So ensure that it stays as requested data as well. And I'm not saying that like there'll be a section of the recommendations that these are the data recommendations. These may make sense paired with other ones. I just wanted to make sure we hadn't missed any and that these were captured correctly.
These are going to be numbered with sections, right?
Yeah.
Then you can just do a reference back to it, leave it in data and just do a reference to the section.
Perfect. Kiminori.
Yeah, I think this issue came up yesterday's listening session too, but is there any answer on domestic violence data? Is it disaggregated by, the type of violence? I mean, that could, be covered across different types of sort of UCR crimes at this point, I think. Do you know if the police department is collecting domestic violence data specifically?
I do not. That's a question I can certainly take back to them. Does anyone on the call know? Otherwise, we'll pose that as a question tonight and hope to have an answer tomorrow.
I believe there was a section in calls for service for domestic, but it may be that it's also captured under other crimes as well, so, or other calls for service. So it's not clear to me if there's a clear count on it.
Okay, we will follow up with a request tonight to try and get that, and we'll share it as soon as we have it. Anyone else? The other set of, it's not data, but the other feedback we need to get you is if some folks from the community session last night said that they were going to follow up with a written statement. So as we get those, we will share them out. Before this, we were trying to batch them, but just because time is getting tight, as we get them, we'll just share them. It could generate a bit of email depending on what comes in, but I want to make sure you're getting them in real time. So we'll go through and make sure we have all of those. Dispatch imperfect title here, but these are the ones that seem to get at what we were just talking about a minute ago about what needs to be a 24-hour response, what should that look like, etc. So this talked about establishment of a 24-hour victim response line, and then the number 24 talked about training dispatchers on where to refer non-police related calls. Number 25 talked about an emergency call center with 311 operator resources directed to non-law enforcement. So this one seemed to be, we've got a 911, let's make sure we have a 311 that deals at the same level of urgency, but with non-police issues. And then 19 talked about eliminating funding for construction of a new dispatch area. And I just wanted to see, is there any overlap around any of these? Are we needing one 24-hour line and then the triage happens when people call? Or is the specific recommendation that we need two different types of numbers you call? You call a number for policing and you call a number for everything else that we're organizing in different sections. Just give us some clarity on this. And if we want to leave them as separate recommendations, we can easily do that. I just want to make sure they're as clear as possible. Sadie?
So I think that like one of the problems is that when we've been listening to a lot of people in city council earlier on, is that like regardless of all the services that like might exist in the correct departments where people should be calling, they're still calling 911 because that's what's ingrained and that's what people first think to call. So I think if it could be like through 911, but dispatchers themselves could be trained to then, instead of routing those people to the police, they could be routed to a separate, whatever we decide to call this new separate thing. So if 911 can still be like the overall number, because it's not just police, it's also fire, like hospital, other things as well.
Got it. Got it. So you have a 911 that's 24/7. That's what people expect it to be. And we need another 24/7 type of number that people can call for things that aren't kind of a police fire. Is that what I'm saying? Hearing?
No, exactly the opposite.
The exact opposite. This is a point around comprehensive training for the dispatchers to dispatch the calls as needed to be directed to whatever services that can be dispatched to this. So this would be if it's a non-emergency medical line, can we get medical access to them, i.e. mental health counseling or someone to help get a cat off the tree. If this is non-emergency law enforcement, that's not pressing issue, can we direct that somewhere else?
So it's a triaging recommendation, awful word, but it's saying if something comes into 911, the person who answers that 24/7 needs to be able to direct resources that are non-police resources in real time. Am I getting that right, Sadie?
Yes. So it's essentially like the 911 isn't solely a police number, and so dispatchers can just be trained to refer to this new separate unit that will be created instead of the police for a list of things that they're trained to do for. But just like in general, I think people will never stop calling 911. That's ingrained.
So Sadie, if I'm hearing you correctly, and Ajma, I see your head nodding, and I've heard some of the conversations we've had. Michael, if I may, I and not to edit live time, but this is more of a training per dispatch, right? If I'm hearing this, how to train the dispatch professionals to do to allocate the call to wherever it needs to go. Am I hearing that correctly?
I'm seeing a shaking a head. So I'm going to go Ajamel and then Kiminori.
It's more than that. It's going to what Michael's question was. I mean, so I drafted 3 with the insight of the community quality of life group. And the idea is, what the first bullet point says is that it's going to be all the things that Sadie said, but not staffed by police. It's not about training the police to do something different. It's about keeping the line that there is now, but having it function differently in terms of what is done when people call it. And I think Sadie did a great job of sketching out what that should be, and so I won't repeat it. But then also not having police be the ones who answer it, but other individuals.
Got it. I thought that's what I said a minute ago, and everyone said no. So we are creating a second line that is staffed by non-police or
no.
police.
There's no second line. There's just one line.
You call 911.
And if the dispatcher needs to refer the issue to police, they will, but it's not a second line. It's the one line that exists.
I think the confusion here might be, I don't know if you're referring to then the dispatchers contacting the police as a line, because I think that might be where the confusion is. I don't
2 lines. You can call 911 or you can call the victim's
No.
response line.
No, it's you just call 911.
Yep.
And then within 911, there are multiple places that dispatchers can contact. Like they can contact the police, they can contact people to like send ambulances over, they can contact fire. There are other things, I'm sure. And so we add another like subset to that group of like fire, police, like medical help, and that would be this separate group that would have more things like for mental health stuff, like everything we've basically just been talking about for the past like 20 minutes. And so that wouldn't be, it's still 911 that people are calling, but the difference is not who the citizens and individuals are calling, but it's who the dispatchers are then contacting after the individuals are calling 911.
Yeah. Is there agreement on that? Perfect. So I'm seeing some stuff in the chat. I just want to make sure I get this right. All calls still go to 911. Once they come to 911, there's training and instruction and policies around referring that call to the appropriate channel, be it fire, police, community services team, neighborhood response team, mental health resources, but the triaging happens at the dispatch level. Am I getting that right?
No.
And if not, it's because there's confusion around this. So I want to make sure that's I believe word for word what Sadie just said. So if that's not right, correct it for me so I can make sure the recommendation is correct.
Can I just pose a question, Michael, to the task force?
Yeah.
Just quickly, so I know that 911 is communicated as an emergency line only. And though, like, I'll give an example, DC's dispatch center takes non-emergency and emergency calls, but the number is quite different, but the dispatch is the same. Is it that we're also encouraging people to call 911 for non-emergency things as well? Just want to make sure that that messaging is clear, because I think that'll take some communication on behalf of government to say this is an emergency line, but also you can call it for non-emergency things, though that's not like the rhetoric of 911 across the nation.
I see Kiminori and Ajamel and Jide. Ajamel's taking his hand down. I see Kiminori and Jide.
Okay, so first about that. I mean, if we establish this new, you know, for example, neighborhood services division or, you know, community safety, what was that? Community assistance office. I mean, they're going to have their own sort of phone number of some sort that the people can use to contact those offices. And I think, you know, the public can be encouraged to, you know, call them if that's not an emergency. The issue is not emergent. Now, if the issue is not, doesn't require emergency response, right? Now, if people call 911, then the 911 call, I don't know in Takoma Park, it's a small city, so I don't know who's taking the call. It's a, you know, call taker, operators. There could be just one or two people, I don't know. But they're not usually police officers to begin with, I think. They're sort of, you know, really professional operators and dispatchers. Now, they can be, so part of it could be that the training of the dispatchers, as someone said, but also in sometimes those operators and dispatchers are kind of embedded with clinicians to sort of better inform that triaging process, so that the more non-emergency calls can be diverted to non-police services and other agencies. So, you know, because I see that I think it's subcommittee 1, I think staff not by police officials, but by trained social service workers. So I thought that could be part of that, and that might be effective way to achieve our goals as well. I also have a question about what is, if someone can clarify, like the construction of a new dispatch area. I just don't know what that is about. So.
Got it. Let me get G-Day because it's probably on the topic we're talking about, and then we'll come back to that one. G-Day?
So it was on the topic we're talking about, but I also had the same question as Kaminori. But so I guess first, who exactly controls the 911 for Takoma Park? Is that under the management of the city, or is it under the direct management of the police? Because it seems like a lot of the recommendations are turning on who's actually staffing 911.
Not to put you on the spot, council members, but either of you know the answer to that? I think you're the only city officials with us tonight.
Yep. That is a city function. Is within the police department. They are professional call takers, civilian employees of the police department.
Thank you. So I guess from my perspective, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I would just think that the calls need to be routed or what have you, and they would only be for emergent issues. For non-emergent issues, then the number that Kaminori alluded to for that civilian group would be able to handle, all non-emergent issues. But for emergent issues, the call center would just route the call to the appropriate group.
Council member?
Yes, just one other important factor is that if you dial 911, that will go through the county 911 board, and then they transfer it to Takoma Park. And so I don't think they'll be tickled with having non-emergency calls going directly, through them.
So, Councilmember, not looking for you to help craft a recommendation on the spot, but in that process, because that seems like very relevant information, all 911 calls go to the county level first, and then they're routed back to Takoma Park for local response from police, etc.
That's correct. And so they transfer it to the 911 call taker here in Takoma Park. And so with the earlier suggestion that you have those same people capturing calls for non-emergency and non-police involved calls, that would work, except that I think you would need to have a different number that went directly to the Takoma Park dispatchers. And that might be advantageous because then calls that go to 911 might more likely be the emergency calls that require immediate police intervention. And obviously there's, people don't follow that all the time now, and they won't in the future, but people hopefully would start to realize that the domestic abuse and those kind of things that might not require police intervention, that there would be a separate line for that.
So just, I'm gonna flowchart this out, and then I'm gonna go to Jumana and back to G-Day. So calls come in to 911 at the county level. They're then currently routed to Takoma Park through a police-based civilian dispatcher, right?
Correct.
So at the Takoma Park level, you could have those people receive the policing calls, and you could create a separate function that refers people to non-emergency type numbers.
Yes, and in fact, that almost exists today. There is a separate phone line that goes directly to the Takoma Park dispatcher. It's 301-270-1100 that goes directly to the dispatcher, and people are encouraged to do that for non-emergency calls. But again, that's not adhered to very well today.
Got it. Jumana?
I just want to point to, what Sadie put in the chat, which is, I think, the concern that it goes to Montgomery County first. I don't think it's a concern because, as Sadie's been saying, people still call 911 for everything all the time, right? 911, my power is out. And so, and 911 gets accustomed to dealing with that. I once called 911 in DC because someone was literally in front of me having a heart attack. And then she's like, oh, so this is an emergency, I'll transfer you, because they gotten so used to getting those other kind of calls. And so if it's a scenario where, like what Sadie was saying, for the people that call 911 anyway, and it gets kicked to Takoma Park, and then that person knows, oh, this person is calling about X, I can transfer it to that office. That doesn't impact in any way Montgomery County, right? Because it's what happens when it gets routed to Takoma Park, that they know how to dispatch it, and then if people know how to call otherwise. But like, nothing stops the fact that people still call 911 reflexively. So I think is this may be different from, or slightly distinct from the other recommendations, but what Sadie said made perfect sense to me. And I don't think it's implicates Montgomery County in any different way than they're already implicated by the people who just reflexively call 911.
Got it. So I want to go to Sadie, and then I want to figure out a path forward on this one. We've spent the most time today on this, which means we've got to find the clarity in the recommendation that makes it easy for the council to say, oh, they're asking us to do this. And it could be that we're asking for the dispatch function to be handled differently. It could be that I'm hearing we need to make sure there's a 24-hour-a-day resource that you can refer things to if they're coming more to the community safety team level. And it seems like a lot of that's in there. So we should make sure we're aligning around them. Sadie, and then Councilmember Searcy.
Yeah, sorry for skipping the line, but yeah, I agree with what Jumana said. And like, just to further clarify, like, because I don't think that I just want, well, I guess the question is like, if the call is from Takoma Park, like no matter what, will Montgomery County Police still route that call to the Takoma Park Police Department? Because then I feel like there definitely won't be an issue if we just have all the training and stuff happen at the Takoma Park level. As long as we're sure that like the process for selecting, we just need to like check and see what the process for selecting which calls are actually routed to Takoma Park are.
Got it. Councilmember?
And Councilmember Siemens did a great job of explaining how dispatch works. One thing that's important to keep in mind is we currently have a non-emergency line. So there's, of course we have 911, but we also have a non-emergency line. Now, whether or not people know that number by heart, are able to make the necessary decisions around what constitutes an emergency or not, those are different issues, but we currently have a non-emergency and an emergency 911. So I just want to make sure that that point is clear so that folks understand that it isn't just 911 that's currently available in the city.
Got it. And so as we look at these recommendations, what is written on the page in three different recommendations right now doesn't fully reflect the conversation we just had. Parts of it live in all of these. So I don't think we're gonna get there as a group tonight. It sounds like you all know what you want this to say. So we'll take our best attempt at organizing this and then sending it back around. And Sadie, it seems like you know what this should be, and it seems like you're getting a lot of agreement across the screen. So we might need your help aligning some of the text around this so that we're getting it right. I saw here it says emergency call center 311 operator resources. Anything that we haven't talked about that lived in the group that came up with 25, or have we already covered all of that?
So that suggestion we wanted to take out like a week ago. I just by accident kept staying in. So yeah, we already agreed to take that out.
Perfect. That was easy. And I think we've got everything under here. So we just have to align 3 and 24 with what was just discussed. So I think that is helpful. Okay, now to 19. The questions were, where did this one come from, and any background that's kind of leading to that recommendation?
So that's mine. I just put in the chat a link to the budget, which talks about an $800,000 project to build the police department a new dispatch area. It just seemed problematic to me that we are talking about removing the dispatch responsibilities from the police department while at the same time allocating over the next couple, more than a couple probably, more than $250,000 to building a new dispatch area for the police department. It may be that the way that the dispatch area is going to be finally constructed, that it can live physically outside of the confines of the police department. I don't know, but if it's literally going to be in or part of the police department, I know that physical proximity isn't everything, but physical proximity does matter. I think it sends a message if you're having these dispatchers show up every day and have them go to work as part of the police department or literally in the police department next to other officers, even if they're technically not police officers.
Thoughts, questions, feedback? Kiminori.
I mean, I understand, and you know, if there's an idea to even move that call center away from the police department, I have no problem. But if you're thinking about, training of dispatchers and even adding, more positions to facilitate this important triaging decision, I mean, it's not necessarily bad to give funding to the dispatchers or dispatching capability. And if that happens to live in the police department, that's what happens. But if you want to remove it, I have no problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think it's framed the way it's framed intentionally, that it's an eliminating funding for a new dispatch area for the police department, which is the language in the budget document that I linked to. I have no opposition to funding for a new dispatch area, period, that would be separated from the police department.
Thank you, Ajamel. Talisha?
So I just want to just provide a little bit more context about the current dispatch area. I don't know, I think maybe a couple of you have had an opportunity to tour the police department, and the current dispatch area is quite tight, and it's basically in a kind of like the basement, for lack of better words, of the building. And the issue with relocation of the dispatch area is that you do still need to have that technical capability to connect and patch into those 911 calls, but you also need some privacy. And we have this huge atrium that echoes sound. So part of this, funding for the new air quotes dispatch area is in part to kind of give more space and more private space for the dispatchers to take those calls. So I just wanted to provide that little bit of background. So whichever approach the task force recommends, be it, taking the dispatch out of the police department, what I'm hearing is that there's still going to be a need for dispatchers related to 911 calls. There's still going to need to be dispatchers to kind of route those non-emergency or social service calls. And there's still going to be a need for there to be space for them to do that function and access the technology that they need, as well as the privacy that they need to maintain the privacy of those that are calling. So that's just something that's important to keep in mind. So if you all, as part of your recommendation, feel that the issue is not necessarily making sure that the dispatchers have space to do what it is you're recommending, but there's concern about that being tied to the police budget, that would be helpful to make that distinction clear for the council as we move forward.
Thank you. Ajamel?
I agreed with 99% of that, and that was helpful. Thank you, Councilwoman. I agreed with all of it except that last part about the concern being tied to the police budget. It's broader than that. I literally have a problem with the dispatch area living within the police department, because I think that culture really matters. And so I 100% agree with you that they should have a private area. I also 100% support them having funding for a private area in the community center. I just don't think it should be in the police department. And so I think that it should be moved. I would be open to an additional language after what's in there that says, alternatively, and I'm just making this up on the fly, the task force would support funding for an area, within the community center, separate and apart from the police department, which provides the necessary privacy and technology capabilities. Again, I thought your explanation was super helpful and super useful.
Got it. This is really helpful. Jide?
Sorry, I don't really understand what the concern is. I hear that you want it separate, but I don't understand why.
I think that one of the importance is that if you have people coming to work every day and it's located within the police department physically, I think that impacts the way that they're going to do their job. I think that's going to impact who they're interacting with and how they see their responsibilities. I think it also sends a larger message to the community about how they do their job. If it's located in the police department, we may know that it's not part of the police department, but people will understand the dispatchers as being part of the police department. I think those are the two main concerns.
Follow-up questions? Thoughts? Okay, let's do this. Let Ajamel, if you want to take a shot at some updated language around that recommendation, just based on the discussion, we can include that in a new draft as it goes back out and dialogue and look back and forth for that. I am going to not editorialize here because that is not helpful. I think some of this goes to, outside of all the details we're working on, what does the public think and believe happens when they call 911 and what needs to actually happen when they call 911. And so as the task force continues in whatever version of that, really focusing on the communication around those things makes sense. We worked in another city that decoupled their 911 dispatch from the police, and the pushback became, well, often when I call 911, I need a police response and I don't want anything to slow that down. And the real answer was, well, what happens in the back end doesn't change response time. So it's just a lack of understanding on how dispatch actually works and what the word dispatch means. But that's not something we have to figure out in terms of a recommendation. It can be part of making sure there's a broader community understanding of what line to call and what should happen when that goes forward. But Ajamel, can I get updated language from you on this to include in the next draft? Okay. Perfect. This next one, and I know it's getting late. We'll go to a faster clip here, but slow me down. These, I just put together the specific recommendations that call for funding specific positions. So there was number 1, funding for creation of a city staff resource coordinator. 17 was additional staff for the Takoma Housing and Community Development Department. And then 21 and 22 weren't like hire a new person. They were make sure the pension plan for the police officers includes same-sex partners and make sure the employee assistance program appropriately is funding and providing for mental health services for officers. And then there was the one that needs further investigation. That's how it was written in there. This is an issue that needs further investigation. Should we look at anything that allows officers to live here more and be more integrated? So going up to the first two, anything needed, change or clarity around this? City staff resource coordinator to coordinate community activities, outreach, neighborhoods, and then additional staff for housing and community development. Are those all correct? Okay. And I think these have some really good explanations in them. Well, the first one, number 1, we probably should add a little bit of language around the why to that, just to make sure it's clear when it's going forward as a recommendation. Kiminori?
No, that was my question. I'd just like to know exactly what the coordinator does. Beyond any sort of city-wide coordinators probably that exist today, and anything, how is that related to sort of public safety, I guess?
So the group who came up with this one, can someone unpack that recommendation, please? Facilitators, jump in if you can. Everyone's still awake? Which group?
Emil, I think this was and Ajmal could correct me, I think this came from Community Quality of Life. Dwayne or Ajmal, I don't know if you guys recall differently. I think this was something that Sawa may have come up with. So I don't actually have any more detail on this. We may have to circle back on this, reach out to Sawa and then see, and then we can put together some more detailed language. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable request. I just don't have any additional context for this recommendation, but we'll provide further language.
Emil, Dwayne, and Ajamel, if y'all remember at the very beginning in our first 1 or 2 sessions, this one was around creating a body that allowed the city to bring folks together so that they can have more coordination amongst community partners, and then have a dedicated staff member to serve as the coordinator of that body, and to serve as someone who can keep groups and nonprofits and community groups, civic groups and tenant associations coordinated from the city's perspective, so that outreach is being done, if y'all remember those conversations.
So I think, great, get us that additional text. We'll go ahead and add that in. Thank you, Emil and Jevon, on that. And then I think we don't need to figure out all of the staffing for this. There's a process beyond it, but I do think there's a really good question of, does a person like that sit within the newly created department of, or is this the person who's responsible for organizing the ongoing task force? I think those become really helpful discussions, so they're not kind of one-off funding recommendations that I'm sure the council has to figure out at some level what to prioritize. And it can be more, we need someone in this role. This person could achieve a lot of different things on this list, but we'll look forward to that updated text. For 21 and 22, I want to see if there's anything that we need on this, or if this is clear to everybody.
So 20, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. This is Emil. So 21 is mine, and it's really a question and then a recommendation contingent on the question. So as it was explained to us, Takoma Park has its own pension plan, its own defined benefit pension plan for local police officers, because at the time, for our police officers, our sworn officers, because at the time it was established, the Maryland state pension plan for local police officers didn't cover same-sex partners. And so the question is that still the case? I mean, I tried to research this, but couldn't get a definitive answer through Google. But if the Maryland state pension plan for local police officers now does cover same-sex partners, and the question is, could at least new hires, newly hired Takoma Park sworn officers enroll in that plan rather than in our municipal plan? And then the second question is, would it be possible for us to enroll our current officers in the Maryland state pension plan for local police officers, potentially by making a lump sum payment? And the reasoning here, and we could add this language, is that it can be very burdensome for a municipality to fund a defined benefit pension plan. And it's one of the top reasons why municipalities go bankrupt. So if it's no longer necessary for Takoma Park to fund a separate defined benefit pension plan for the sworn officers, i.e. the Maryland state pension plan for local police officers now does cover same-sex partners, then again, we should explore enrolling new hires in the state plan and see if we can also enroll the existing hires in the state plan, so that we're, again, relieved of what can be a very significant financial burden, and also very unpredictable, depending on investment returns, et cetera. And I could add language on that, but if people think that would be helpful, but that's the thinking.
So Emil, let us pose the question to get a really specific answer. We'll do that as soon as the meeting's done tonight. Hopefully have something to share out by tomorrow. And then you can let us know based on that answer, if this is the right level of detail, if more needs to be in, et cetera. Does that work?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. And then this one was about making sure the employee assistance program has appropriate funding, so that officers are provided with access to all of this. This actually came out of one of the steering committee meetings a couple weeks ago. So I just want to make sure everyone is clear with this one, is fine with it. Any questions on that one? I think it's got a pretty good level of detail on it. And then this one, it was in the document as an issue that needs further investigation. Would you like us to include it as future bodies come together, an issue to further investigate is, it's the idea of affordability, and can the folks who provide services in Takoma Park live here? Do we want to make that specific to police? Do we want to broaden that? Just kind of give me a level on if you're trying to come to some conclusion around it as a group, or if you want it in there as this needs further exploration. So please take it up as you move forward. So I can just take issue that needs further investigation and incorporate that into the recommendation, if that's where you're going for. Does that sound right? Okay. Perfect. Communications. Not a lot here, I think, needs clarity. I just lumped everything together that fell into that context. So this was talking about a resource guide of mental health resources and community partners, publishing it online. I think the why/goal here was we don't think something like this exists and it could be helpful. Is that correct? Okay, this was talking about making sure that posted to the website and social media are any increases in funding for police at least 30 days before the budget is voted on. This one actually tied back to another recommendation really helpfully. Do we want to keep this as a separate standalone recommendation, or would we want to put it under, if you have a task force, it could look at things like this? It seems like it was spelled out specifically to say police funding is at a different level. We need to make sure that we get at least 30 days. Is that correct? Okay, thank you, Ajamal. I see a nod on that. Slow me down if anything's not going the way we need it to here. Ensure annually that the city publishes code violations in apartments in Takoma Park over the last calendar year. I remember there was some discussion about who's doing the code enforcement. Is it county or not? And I remember the city manager saying, either way, locally, we're asking for that to happen. So we should be able to track that data. So I think this one is pretty clear, but let me know if anything in here isn't making sense to the group as a whole.
The county does publish it, I believe. So I've looked it up for apartment complexes before. So
got it. So let me go back to that one, Michael, and just make sure if it lives somewhere that the recommendation is, and that needs to be easily accessible in the Takoma Park website. Does that make sense?
yeah, there should be a link to it potentially of where you get it, on the county site. So yeah.
There's nothing like letting a whole group of people see how bad you are at spelling in front of 25 people. It's been a long day. Increase public accessibility and citizen oversight of police complaints and disciplinary procedures. This one was absolutely linked to other recommendations. So I just will relink it with that one because it doesn't seem like it's a standalone. It seems like this has to happen and here's all the ways that'll happen. Does that sound right to everyone? Got it. This one talked about posting online documents, post reports online documenting investigations into citizen complaints. This was a communications and transparency one. There's a lot of detail in this one, so don't think it's missing anything, but any questions or comments around that one that we need to address as a task force? Okay. Strengthen community police communications. Create avenues of communications which are useful and accessible for community members to share public safety concerns with the police department and receive timely responses and follow-up. Can this be tacked on to anything else we've already talked about, or that's a separate and standalone recommendation? It seemed rather general, so I just wanted to make sure if it was supposed to be specific that we got the specificity in here. And if not, we can use this as an overarching goal for what a lot of these recommendations are trying to accomplish. Is that the right way to look at it? Kiminori?
Yeah, I think I came up with that. So initially I thought like revamping the Chiefs Advisory Board, but I don't mind disbanding that altogether and create a new mechanism so that community members can actually communicate with the police department in terms of their public safety concerns. So this is not like a oversight or sort of watchdog for the police department. This is like, this is what's happening in my ward or my street. Can police department do something about it? And they actually have the communication channel so that we get a response, not just calling 911 and report crimes. And usually nothing happens. And then same is true for all the business owners. Their concerns. Sometimes police officers come and they do check out things and go back and nothing ever happens. So a little more robust sort of communication channels for all community members. I think Adam said interest groups and other groups in the community to have a sort of robust channel with the police department to solve whatever the public safety concerns they have.
Got it, Kiminori. That's really helpful. And we've got a whole series of recommendations around policing and changes to policing, et cetera. Maybe this fits there, that in addition to all these things around enforcement, et cetera, there's also a hope, desire, and expectation that there's continued strengthening of police community communication. And it looks like this. Does that sound right? So we just move it to that section, but it stays as a standalone recommendation.
Sure. Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Okay. This one had some real specificity. The green here, the green is stuff that I understand was supposed to be in the publicly available discussion draft and wasn't, because it was a very long document. So this is not our language. This is stuff that a subcommittee asked us to add in because it was missing in the stuff that went out Friday. So this is talking about training. This is talking about increasing the content and structure and ease of use of city and websites. And then this talked about improve the ease in filing and accessing of reports to reduce the need to call 911, involvement of armed police officers. It talks about providing complete, timely, intuitive, and sustainable data access to the public and other stakeholders, and creating an FAQ section about police department policies and practices. Clarify and inform when calling 911 is most appropriate and where other numbers or protocols should be used. Address cultural language barriers, hearing, vision, speech difficulties, and strengthening existing methods of communication, email, alert, social media, and then a dedicated public information officer for city communications, improving web navigation on the city's website. So this provided the sub-bullets to what was said about like improve communication, improves the website. But the group who we left this out accidentally, anything on this that needs more clarity? Anyone have questions about any of this if we're going to include it?
Team, I know we wanted to include, add this to that because it was missed, but anything we missed with this one?
Okay, so this, I just want to make sure I'm getting this one right. The improve the ease of filing and accessing reports. So this is basically saying, let's make sure calling 911 isn't the only way that you can file something that needs city attention. Is that basically what this one's getting at? That if we increase the other ways that people can let us know of things, it decreases the number of things that are coming in specifically through 911. Is that correct?
Correct.
I'm not sure whose that is, so I just want to make sure
Yeah,
I got it.
I think I think I drafted that language, and that's the intent.
Got it. And so as
more ways to file police reports or whatever they need, even for maybe insurance purposes or things like that, so they don't need to call 911, and armed officers don't need to show up at all. But it's recorded, right?
Yeah.
So the police know what happens, and they can consider that for their other actions.
Got it. And so all I wrote here is let's look at in the final version of this document if it makes sense for that to kind of be paired with some of the other recommendations we were talking about around dispatch and how things are handled. This might be a nice complementary piece of that, or it lives in a different section, but it seems like it makes perfect sense there. This provide timely, complete, intuitive, and sustainable data access to the public and other stakeholders. That is a data request, so we want to make sure it's noted as such as we move forward. So I'm going to look at if it pairs with other data. Go ahead, Kiminori.
Yeah, so that's also kind of my language. Yeah, so they have annual reports, and then we also saw that sort of interactive, pretty fancy data presentations. But make sure that we provide data in a sort of timely, accessible, and often standardized across jurisdictions. So, and you can download, the table format, and so others can analyze if they wish to do so. And there are standards out there for sort of, data sharing sort of protocols. So, the city can follow that as well. Because I was worried that, that presentation was very impressive, but if that person leaves, what's going to be we're going to be left with? So, it's not just a one-time thing, right? It has to be sort of a regular reporting. And also crime known to police, it's only like going up to like 1 year. So make sure that we can go back further down so we can actually look at crime trends and other things so that we can consider these reforms in perspective.
That makes sense. This dedicated public information officer for city communications, that should be moved to the staffing section, just so it kind of lives together as we're thinking through this. Any more clarity needed on this one? So as I understand what was presented to us, we have people who are playing PIO roles we might not, is this calling for one dedicated person that coordinates those efforts on behalf of the city? I want to make sure I have this one correct. And council members, if you know what the staffing currently looks like around that, please jump in. Otherwise, I can get that clarity from the city manager and send it around. But is the recommendation here one dedicated PIO?
Yep, I think when we were talking to the city communications, there wasn't a communications role or PIO that kind of coordinated with all of the agencies from the city level.
Got it. Jamal, is this your group?
Yes.
Can you work just to get a couple more lines of text that kind of give the why and the goal so that this becomes a little bit more robust and matches some of the other staffing ones?
Yep.
Got it. I'm putting your name by it, but of course the text will come from your group. Okay. This is where we've touched up on a lot of these, but when we, go ahead, Jumana.
I put in the chat earlier, but I just want to flag, I do have something I want to ask directly related to these recommendations, but something I wanted to follow up on. So I don't want us to run out of time before that happens. So I just was flagging it.
Okay. Absolutely. Let me see what progress we can make here. We're got 6 pages left. So let me go through these, and it's completely fine to say we can't cover this one tonight. Let's do it over email. This one talks about identifying a subset of officers who are responsible for responding to calls without weapons and providing specific training to these officers on violence prevention and de-escalation. This is not paired with like new division, new function, because it seemed like this recommendation was this is still within the police force. It's just a part of the department who's responding in a way that is prioritizing de-escalation. Am I getting that one right?
That's right. I could go either way on this one. I think that when I was drafting, I was trying to be as comprehensive as possible. And so if we feel like, once we remove the functions of the community safety assistance team and the neighborhood services division, that there are no roles for police that won't involve weapons, that's fine. But I also could imagine scenarios that didn't fit within the community safety assistance team or the neighborhood safety team that might end up people wanting police assistance about. So I just don't know. Maybe I think I could use the team's guidance on there. Either we could essentially craft the other ones in such a way that this one won't need to exist, or if we think that there's still going to be some scenarios where cops are going to be wanted that are not social service situations and not low-level code enforcement situations, and we want police officers responding to those situations without weapons, then I'm fine keeping it as well. But that's the thinking behind it.
Got it. Kiminori?
Now, if I see like violence prevention, that sounds to me that there's a sort of element of potential violence. And if the cops are still responding, I don't know why they particularly need to be, unarmed. And another approach, if you're thinking of more like a violence interruption, kind of street outreach workers and things of that kind, that can live totally outside of the police department, right? To get into the sort of street level, conflict. I just don't know what kind of gang problems we have in Takoma Park, but maybe we do. So that could be a quite different model.
I'm fine cutting. It's fine.
Okay. The next ones here are getting into specific things that we should and should not be doing. So it talks about ending police traffic stops for low-level offenses, such as not wearing a seatbelt or having an expired license. It talks about officers not searching a vehicle or residence unless they have probable cause or written consent. This one also has a data element that we should be documenting specific things. Then we get into so actually let's go there. I think if you ask the police department, they say, we already don't do these things. I don't have an opinion on that. So is the recommendation here that we need to document these so that that's not up to the discretion of the police chief? Or do we need to say, you know, we don't know that these things are happening and we believe it's important that they do. And so here's our recommendation. Or do we leave them exactly how they are?
I definitely think 13 and 14 happen. In that, I definitely think that there are stops for low-level offenses. And I definitely think that they don't require obtained written informed consent for all searches that they do. So I don't think that those are problems that don't exist.
So I'm hearing keep the language as it is because it's addressing a specific goal. Emil? And then G-Day.
Yeah, I agree with Ajmal. Which is not surprising because he developed these, and our subcommittee members already reviewed them, and we strongly support them. But I think that this should be made policy, and if it turns out that this is basically not happening, there's no harm in making it policy. I agree with Ajmal. I think it is happening, but we don't necessarily have the detailed data to know. But again, even if it's not happening, I still think there's value in making it the policy. And if it's not happening under Chief Duvall, we want to make sure it doesn't happen under his successor as well. So I don't think there's any problem with keeping it, even if this is in fact happening rarely, which hasn't been documented, at least not to my satisfaction.
Got it. G-Day?
Yeah, I thought we'd agreed to flesh out kind of the points, the quote unquote low level offenses later. I thought that that's what Adam had been talking about. And it seems like some clarification of what constitutes low level is warranted. I don't necessarily think folks should be stopped in all instances, but stopping somebody about a seatbelt or whatever is certainly an innocuous thing. But I mean, I guess in theory, it could also be an instance where somebody could lose a life. So, I don't know where the spectrum is or what have you, but I think that we need to say more than just, don't do low level stops. In terms of number 14, I thought that there was stuff at the state level that gave the police those particular powers. So I'm not entirely sure how much play there is for Takoma Park on that one, but I guess they could certainly recommend.
Got it. And so what we can do as part of our ongoing questions of which we need more information for, we can see if there are any state level regs around that. The low level of offenses, if the team that developed this wants to go in and clarify that, feel free to do that. These are also the great things that can be, use the ongoing Takoma Park task force to figure out what we mean by things like. So I think a lot of you can refer some of these back to the ongoing public process because you're making that such a central and strong recommendation.
Michael?
Yes.
Is it possible also to reach back out to the chief and find out currently what their view is on what constitutes a low level offense that they currently aren't pulling people over for? Maybe that'll at least give us a starting point to expand upon.
Currently. Yep. Okay, I am aware of the time and I don't want to rush these. So I'm looking through what we have left here and I think it's possible to get through them, but I want to get to Jumana first because I know she had a specific thing and I want to get to that before anyone has to drop. So Jumana, go ahead.
Yeah, so the question that I wanted to ask about, I think everybody remembers, but like not long after we started this, 2 men were shot and killed by an off-duty Pentagon police officer, literally across New Hampshire from my neighborhood. And, disturbing facts came out about both the way in which Takoma Park police responded initially, but also how they had responded to a call about the same man, not even quite a year before this shooting. And at the time, there was a lot of community engagement about that. Like I had asked the question of the chief specifically because I had community activists asking me saying like, we talked to the chief and he said the task force is going to review this, we're going to hear about this, which we had never been told. When I raised it to the chief, he said, yes, we were going to get a debrief on it. And when I have asked since then, we basically got an obfuscation saying like, well, we can't comment on an ongoing criminal investigation, which we didn't ask for. Well, he's out of our, he's not in our jurisdiction because he's a Pentagon police officer and they review that. I get that. But what we haven't gotten is any explanation by what he meant. call out and there is video, check the video, or just something that is not in any way implicated in a criminal prosecution or something they wouldn't tell us, or at the very least, the chief complying with what he told outside activists and what he told us. And, you know, I'm sure it is in the notes. I know I asked the question. I'm sure it's on the video. I just don't, and this whole process has been extended by a month and nobody has circled back to us. So I don't want us to close this out without at least hearing something on that, because even if it's sort of faded from public memory, for the families of the two men who are dead, that is not going to fade. And if we let it go, then it goes. And so I just want that to be sort of on the record and on the radar screen. And I would really like to see a response to that. Michael, if
I'm
you're
adding that
talking,
here. I know it's not a recommendation in the report, but I want to make sure it's captured so that we do that. So I will follow up on that. Is your sense and the sense of the group that that would be a helpful thing to see if we can cover it next week when we're still together as a task force? And I'm guessing that the intent here would be to make this a public discussion, not something that's unique to the task force. Am I getting that correct?
I don't want it to be unique to the task force. I think anything it's, I mean, you know, that I've had this issue before. Yep. If it's something that's going to be shared with us, it should be something to be shared with the public.
Yep.
So yes, that would be my feeling.
Absolutely. I want to make sure I'm taking it back in exactly the way that it's intended. So that is
to be clear, this is a representation of my point of view. I'm not speaking for my committee or for the task force. This is just speaking for me.
Got it. Emil?
Sorry, I just forgot to take my hand down, but I totally agree with Giovanna, as long as I'm talking.
Perfect. That is helpful. I'm going to keep us going because I just am aware of the calendar and I think we can get through the rest of this in the allotted time. But if you have to drop, please feel free. We will continue to record and we will send out a track changed version so you see every edit that's made. I want to make sure people are very clear. Only edits that will be made will be done publicly. There'll be in-track changes. We'll make sure that there's nothing happening between versions that get lost here. So speed cameras, there were a few specific recommendations here. They're pretty detailed. This one was about creating a poverty exemption program. I know when we talked about this as a group, there was some discussion of, we don't know if 300% is the right number or not, but we wanted to give something around it. Do we want to look at reframing this as, for example, do we want to make it like explore or do we want to make it create? I just want to make sure we've got the level of specificity that's wanted in this one. Is this one right as is, or are we looking for anything different?
So I am partial to create. As to the 300% number, maybe, so this is born of litigation that I've done. So what I can do is I can give you examples of other poverty exemption programs around the country. And maybe we can just base it off of those, but I'm not wedded to the 300% number in any way, but I'll forward some examples.
That is great. And then this one had an or. Do we want to keep it as an or? Prohibit or ensure. I'm fine with that. It's kind of written as two sub bullets. I would probably combine them into one just so it reads better. Are we okay with that?
Yeah, I think that there were differing thoughts, reasonably so, among our group about which was the right one. So I think, assuming no one else from my group disagrees, I'm fine with or.
Got it. This one about community police, community-oriented policing, police relationships and partnerships. I know Cordell's group, there were a lot of questions about this, and the ask was, can you flesh this out a little bit more? The subcommittee provided some great level of detail in here that looked at incentives and crime, etc. Anyone looking for more information on this one? Okay. Body worn camera policy. This one has a significant amount of detail to it. Anything that the large group has questions on around this? I know there are some task force members who've really done extensive work on this one. So I just want to make sure if anyone has questions on it, that they get to ask those. Otherwise, these really haven't shifted that much over the last a couple of weeks. These ones have been pretty consistent. So I take that as we're fine with them, but I just wanted to make sure. Okay. I'm going to scroll through them. It's a big section, so we'll make up some time here, but everything that's in here has been in the draft. There's nothing new in this. And then these last two were around clear communication of policing priorities. This one was what the chief should be communicating. Again, it's one of those things that even if we think one chief is doing it well, the recommendation seems to be that this should be part of what chiefs have to do here, is communicate around where policing resources are utilized, and then focus on community engagement and investigating serious crimes. That one likely fits as a sub-bullet under some of the other stuff we've talked about here, but I want to make sure that there's no questions on those two. Okay. Almost done here. Resources and funding. These are the ones that called for a specific allocation or reallocation. So this one talked about reallocating funding from the changes to the budget to increase scholarships for after school and weekend programs, and reallocate funding from any changes in policing budgets for additional scholarships. This one is about eliminating funding for the current use and purchase of additional license plates reader technology. There was a citation around some ACLU outreach, etc. It's not a small recommendation, but it's got a pretty significant level of detail. So just want to make sure if anyone has questions, you have an opportunity to flag them here. Okay. The K9 Unit 1 is about eliminating funding for the use of K9s after the retirement of the single K9 that's currently employed. And if K9s are utilized in the future, they may only be used for tracking purposes, not for use against individuals of the searches of vehicles or residences. I know there's been lots of active dialogue on this one. This is where the recommendation stands currently. Any feedback, or is that a current reflection of where we are? Okay. And then this last section was really around things that we've been told or we've heard through the process. Well, that's not really a Takoma Park specific thing. So make sure you're telling us what you want us to do about that, advocate, explore, etc. So this one was establishing funding for a Know Your Rights street law training for students enrolled in Takoma Park schools. That's added here because, you know, schools are county level, but this recommendation still seems to be Takoma specific. This one is around a resolution calling for removal of SROs in Montgomery County schools in Takoma Park. Any questions on that one? It's more advocacy based. This one talked about coordinating police responses across multiple jurisdictions. What I'm taking away from this is, and I want to clarify this, are we applying this training as we need to make sure that all Takoma Park PD's training live up to guardian policing? Or are we saying that we'd like to advocate that any police force that jurisdictionally operates in or through Takoma Park should also be held to that same level of training? Understanding we don't control it, we're advocating that we should have that expectation. Is this a training one for jurisdictional issues or training for Takoma Park police specifically? And whatever group came up with this one, let me know.
I thought it was a recognition that Takoma Park is already practicing guardian policing, and it was a request that they continue to do that and be something that the council reinforce. And that in terms of the training, making sure that the training continues to be in alignment with that. And I think we talked about maybe upping the frequency of the training, if I'm not mistaken. Does that sound right, Michael? Sadie?
Good, Michael, you're on mute.
Yeah, that does sound right.
So this is a specific.
I mean, I like the idea of recommending the model to like neighboring jurisdictions, but they aren't going to necessarily take it. So I don't know that that's really worth the trouble, but be that as it may.
Got it. It was kind of labeled under coordination of police response, which may have been a label we added. That might be our fault, but I just wanted to make sure I wasn't getting that one incorrect. So this is
no, it is right. That's what we talked about.
Okay, perfect. So, and then increase frequency. Okay, officers should be trained on routing appropriate calls to different offices. That is, I'm going to move that to support the dispatch stuff we talked about before. Protocols, review and update cross-jurisdictional coordination protocols and create and strengthen mutual MOUs with other groups that are operating here and encourage joint training. So this is basically saying, let's make sure we're as coordinated as possible across the jurisdiction.
Yeah, that was just recognition of our physical location and having all the jurisdictions on our borders and just making sure that regular training and MOUs are in place and that kind of thing. It may be done now, we don't know. We didn't get enough specific information about that.
Got it. And you know, I'm going to add here, ask for specifics. I'm going to ask for that just so we have it. And if it strengthens, it's great. If it doesn't, or we don't get it in time, we'll leave everything in, but I'll ask for it and see if we can get that. This was kind of broadly under the education, the group that was really looking at education as well. So this is really about advocacy. Let's advocate to Montgomery County that administrators and teachers receive training, et cetera, et cetera. Can we create grants for Takoma Park teachers to encourage attendance of teacher-specific training on these types of issues? Is there community relations, diversity outreach training? Is that a school system related one, or is that a standalone recommendation? The committee created that one. Is that meant to be a standalone, or is that specific for schools?
This was intended to be a standalone. It was kind of designed around community engagement for the Takoma Park citizenry itself, to kind of foster an open dialogue between residents and try to establish a framework or an opportunity for people to understand one another across kind of socioeconomic or racial lines of diversification.
That makes sense. And then the Takoma Park mentorship program. And that is our 42 recommendations. Adam.
Yeah, I'm sorry to derail the great progress, but I just had kind of a procedural question of whether you're envisioning these recommendations just sort of coming from the task force as a whole now that we're kind of merging some of them, or are we going to maintain the subcommittee structure to some extent and maybe just say, you know, recommendation 3, 7, and 12 comes from, you know, all of the subcommittees or 2 of them? The reason I ask is that you know, there are a few little things here and there that came out of other subcommittees that I might not necessarily be 100% behind, but really didn't bother me enough that I wanted to raise a big think about it. So I just wanted to be clear about whether that structure was going to remain or whether everything was kind of going to be rolled in together.
Thank you, Adam. Short answer is there are a few different ways we can do that. It seemed as we were going through that the ones where our folks had a little uncomfortability, there was like, okay, we can take that out, we can change it. So my sense was that we were getting to a place where we can say we worked at the subcommittee level, we did this level of detail, these types of recommendations came from each subcommittee, but we kind of present them in a way that's a bit more grouped by topic. But if there's more comfort with saying, here are the 42 or whatever this list is going to be recommendations, they're organized by the subcommittees that worked on them, and we put them forward that way, I don't have any organizational reason not to do that if it allows folks to feel more comfortable that the ones they worked on have the words that they chose in them. I'm completely fine with that. What's the sense of the group on that? Michael, and then Jide?
I mean, just quickly, I think since we kind of merged a bunch of them, it kind of already took away a little bit of the subcommittee structure. So I'm more of the opinion of just putting them together. But if, you know, people really have issues with certain ones, then I think we should like talk about those, whether it's continued follow-up by email and try to come to some kind of consensus if we can. I mean, that would be my preference. So.
Got it. And just process-wise, I know we're in a run right now, but we've got our full task force meeting next Tuesday. Report's not going to be finalized till after that. So we could also say we're going to continue working on these as a group, try and get them to a sense that we can do it that way. Look at them, and if by next Tuesday there's still some we don't feel comfortable with individually, we can talk through that, and we can either separate some of those recommendations out or report them as subcommittees. Ajamel, and then Emil.
Yeah, same. Well, I mean, I think I've spoken forcefully about some of mine, but I think that we're best off speaking as a unit. And so I think that if it's possible to work out any points of disagreement, then I think that it's useful to at least try to do that. And so I think that I mean, to the extent that Adam or anyone else is concerned about ones from community quality of life, I'd love some line edits on it, and happy to talk about, at least try to work out some resolution on it if we can.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
just to-
Adam.
Michael. I don't mean to suggest that I have like a list of
No.
15 major objections that are going to and just throw a wrench in this whole thing. It just might be that it might just be a few tweaks in the sense that, like, in some of these we have alternatives, right? Do this or do that in the alternative, and it might just be that you say that the majority recommendation is that we not have new speed cameras, but a minority of task force members are amenable to putting cameras in areas where there are a significant number of accidents. So something like that could make clear that there's like some disagreement, but the majority is going one way and minority another, without having to just maintain the whole committee structure if that doesn't really work.
Yeah, that's well taken on my end.
Emil, Jide, and then Jumana.
Yeah, just very quickly, I agree with what Michael and Ajmal said. I think for the last 2 hours, I think we made quite a bit of progress in coming to consensus as a full task force. So I think we should, to the extent possible, present these as task force recommendations, and we can incorporate language along the lines suggested by Adam, that if there's a divergence, if there are two alternatives, we can just say a minority of the task force members prefer this alternative. That's pretty standard in committee reports. So I think we're fine with a task force wide recommendations.
Absolutely. Jide, I called on you, but I see your hand is down. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I think Emil and Adam covered it. So
got
I'm
it. And I
fine.
saw Jumana's hand as well. Go ahead, Jumana.
No, I mean, I was going to suggest the same thing Adam did. And I think it is critically important that we keep them grouped by category, because the last thing we want is like a confusing set of recommendations, just to make sure they're by committee. But I've worked with task force before, and I think Adam and others are right. Like, it is entirely workable to say this was the majority recommendation, a minority endorsed this recommendation, because the point is this isn't the final word, right? The council has to take and implement. So but I definitely think it needs to be not just cohesive, but it needs to, follow and make sense to people. Otherwise, we've just made more confusing documents for that people can't follow. I don't want us doing that.
Thank you, Jumana. Kiminori.
Yeah, I just have two unrelated things. One is that the community-oriented policing services, like COPS, I think it was recommendation 27. There is a COPS office in the U.S. Department of Justice, so we may want to just, if we name something like that, we might come up with something else. And I think the details of that recommendation have some overlaps with others, including what I was suggesting, a kind of community police liaison or robust communication channel, things like that. So that might be, incorporated there. And another thing, I think I've seen a couple people raise this issue about traffic and pedestrian safety, and as part of the community input. And we don't really, address that at all here. I mean, it kind of scattered in maybe different places. So we might want to clarify in our final report.
I'm adding that in right now. And so that's about pedestrian safety.
Pedestrian, traffic, bike lane, that kind of suggestions and concerns.
Okay.
Again, I just want to make sure at the end of it, all these recommendations, trying to cover or address most of the inputs that we receive from the public, right? And that's minimum, I feel, right? Even if some of them are not data driven or things like that, but we listen to them and we try to address them as much as possible. So.
Got it. Other thoughts, Michael? I'm sorry, Adam, is your hand up? Go ahead. No, from before? Okay.
Sorry.
We have made huge progress tonight. We're going to keep following up. Our team will work tonight into tomorrow again to refine these, track, change, edit with everything we talked about tonight. We'll get that out to you by tomorrow afternoon so that you've got a fully updated version to look at. We can coordinate through email, read these, let us know which ones need to be massaged. We can make sure we're sending out updated versions, asking questions, etc. Hold next Tuesday night. We'll make that a full working session. I don't want anyone to feel like you got to approve everything over email and then Tuesday we're going to, here's the final, thanks and good night. Let's use Tuesday to make sure that we're asking the questions, we're aligning. The calendar allows for that. And as you all know, the council has set their work session for the following Tuesday, the 13th. And so we will get some clarity on what the hope and expectation is around task force participation on that, et cetera. Councilmember Siemens, if you have anything you want to add now on that, great. Otherwise, we can get that and we can use, no, okay, so we'll use next Tuesday to really look through what level of participation is being looked for, et cetera. How are we presenting this? And then you also have in your inbox a draft of the overall report that's going to kind of compile everything we've worked on together. A couple of you, I want to shout out Ajamel, a couple of you have sent really great track edits of let's add this, let's move this here. We're combining all of those and can also send out an updated version of that by tomorrow. There have not been substantial changes to it. I know it's a big document, but anything that you look through that you think needs more or missing, let us know so that throughout this week, we can be finalizing the format of both of these, which will make the tying of them together pretty seamless after next Tuesday's meeting. Does that sound good to everybody? Excellent. Thank you all for your time very, very much. We will be in touch.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Bye.